Today I'm excited to be combining two of my passions, sourdough and vintage cookbooks. This particular cookbook was published in 1977 by Weathervane Books. It was part of a creative cooking series of cookbooks that included creative crockery cooking, creative food processor cooking, and creative microwave cooking. The price tag on the front of the cookbook is for $4.95, which would be around $25.19 today after adjusting for inflation. There's also a price tag inside of the book for $3.83, which would be around $19.49 today. In the introduction, the author says that Christopher Columbus is sometimes credited as discovering sourdough. But if you listen to the yarn spinners reliving the Old West, they would bet their bottom dollar that sourdough starter was created by the miners of the Gold Rush era. These storytellers lay claim to the strains that are still used in California today. They also state that today the interest in sourdough cooking is growing in response to the back to nature trend that our society is experiencing. We are beginning to feel that perhaps some of our forefathers' innovations need not be improved on too much to make life better for mankind. I just find it interesting that there was kind of like this resurgence of interest in sourdough back in the 70s, and we're kind of experiencing that again today. And I kind of feel like we're having a back to nature trend as well. It's just interesting how these things go in cycles. The cookbook then has a section all about how to make sourdough starters, including 5 different methods for making one. But it warns you may have difficulty today in getting yeast colonies to grow in modern homes, especially those surrounded by asphalt, concrete, and newly turned earth. Because of the constant building and tearing down trend in this modern world, yeast colonies are not as plentiful in today's environment as they were in the days of our forefathers. If you happen to live in a 100-year-old farmhouse surrounded by undisturbed vegetation, you will probably have no trouble getting sourdough starter to work by using flour and water. However, if you are like the majority of Americans who do not live in such stable conditions, you will probably have to use commercial yeast to get your sourdough to work effectively. Therefore, this book has included a package of commercial yeast in each recipe that uses yeast as the rising agent. Be brave, experiment. So the author seems to have given up hope that most home cooks would be able to make a strong sourdough starter. I personally have not found this to be true, and I do not live in a 100-year-old farmhouse, though I am surrounded by vegetation. It would be fun to try out some of the yeast bread recipes and just leave out the commercial yeast, but for today I want to turn my attention to the recipes in the cookbook for quick breads, biscuits, desserts, etc. Basically the ones that don't rely on yeast as a raising agent. The first recipe I'm going to be trying out is on page 99, peanut butter biscuits. I don't think I've ever heard of peanut butter biscuits before, so it's going to be interesting to see how they taste. So to make them, you'll need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 teaspoon of salt, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 2 tablespoons of shortening, 1/4 cup of smooth peanut butter, 1/2 cup of sourdough starter, and approximately 1/2 cup of milk. To make them, sift the dry ingredients together. Cut in the shortening and peanut butter until mixture is like coarse cornmeal. Add sourdough starter and enough milk to form a soft dough. Roll or pat dough on floured board to 1/2 inch thick. Cut it with a 2-inch biscuit cutter. Place the biscuits on an ungreased baking sheet and bake them in a 450-degree Fahrenheit oven for 10 to 12 minutes. It yields 1.5 dozen biscuits. All right, so the biscuits are done baking, and now it's time to give them a taste test. First of all, let's see what they smell like. That's not what I expected. I'm not getting a lot of peanut butter smell. I can't really say that I'm in love with this smell, but the taste is what really matters. It's not super flavorful. It's not just like jumping out at me at like a really strong flavor. Not really what I expected. I was expecting the peanut butter to have a stronger flavor, but I'm gonna try it with some butter because butter makes everything better. I mean, I almost feel like with the butter, I can get more of the peanut butter flavor. It's not a bad biscuit, but it's not like jumping out at me as like, wow, this is such an amazing biscuit. Pretty good, but the recipe says delicious served with ham slices, so that's what I'm gonna try next. So I'll slice a biscuit in half, and I'm gonna go ahead and butter, give it the best chance to, oh, there goes my butter. Give it the best chance to be delicious. Full disclosure, ham is not my favorite, but I will withhold judgment. All right, so I'm gonna put some on the biscuit. You know, I'll give it a little bit more. We'll be generous. All right, let's see how delicious this is. Butter's dripping out. I have to admit that the little bit of sweetness and smokiness of the ham does pair pretty well with the biscuits. That is a pretty good combo, but personally I think it'd be even better like maybe with some mustard, some pickles. That'd be really good. But overall, this isn't really like blowing me away. It's good, it's just not like, wow, amazing. It's just not life-altering. So these were a little underwhelming, but I'm excited to try the next recipe. The next recipe is on page 69, and it's called Yankee Doodle Snipdoodle. The description says, an English tea cake with an American addition of delicious sourdough flavoring. So they seem to think that sourdough is kind of an American thing. I'm not sure if they meant that this sourdough resurgence mainly was happening in America, because as far as I know, people in England had been baking with sourdough before people immigrated to America. Now, from the little bit of research that I did, the snickerdoodle cookie was actually based off of the snipdoodle, which is basically what we in America know as a coffee cake. This cookbook states that snipdoodle was from England, but the origins are a little bit iffy. All right, to make this Yankee Doodle Snipdoodle, you'll need 1 cup of margarine. Now, I personally do not like margarine. I slightly despise it. So I was tempted to substitute butter here, but I decided to go ahead and use what the recipe called for. I went for the Blue Bonnet margarine because it says that it's been around for over 60 years. So this is something that would have been available back when this cookbook was written. You'll also need 1 cup of granulated sugar, half a cup of brown sugar packed, 2 eggs, 2 cups of all-purpose white flour, 1/3 cup of whole wheat flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 1 cup of sourdough starter, half a cup of milk, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. You start by creaming the margarine and half a cup of granulated sugar and the brown sugar until light and fluffy. Then you beat in the eggs one at a time. And then separately you combine the white and whole wheat flours, baking powder, and salt. And then in a separate bowl combine the starter and milk. Add the dry mixture and starter mixture alternately until all ingredients are blended into the batter. Lightly grease and flour an 8 by 12 inch cake pan. Pour the cake batter into the greased pan. Combine 1/4 cup of sugar and the cinnamon. Sprinkle over top of batter. Place pan in the middle of a 350 degrees Fahrenheit oven and bake the cake 50 minutes or until a toothpick inserted in the center comes out clean. Serve it warm. This actually smells really good, so I'm excited to give it a try. Now, I noticed while baking this that in the recipe, there's half a cup of sugar that isn't accounted for. It calls for 1 cup of granulated sugar to go in the cake, but then it only has you put in half of it, and then it never mentions it again. And then it also calls for 1/4 cup of sugar for the topping, but that extra half a cup of sugar, I don't know where they meant that to go, so I didn't see anywhere in the recipe where it said to add it. Now, the recipe said to bake it for 50 minutes, but I set the timer for 40 minutes and started checking it then, and I ended up baking it for 45 minutes. The cinnamon sugar crust on top kind of gets crackly, which looks really beautiful, but the true test is in the taste. So there's a nice kind of yeasty flavor, and then the crust is nice and crunchy and sweet. The cake itself is not sickeningly sweet, which I appreciate. The cake is nice and soft, but it has kind of like, the texture is kind of like between a cake and like a yeast bread or a sweet roll. I like that a lot. Now, would I make any adjustments? I would personally put some vanilla extract into the batter of the cake. I think that would enhance the flavor somewhat. It also might be kind of nice to put half of the batter into the pan and then sprinkle some of the cinnamon sugar on top and then add the rest of the batter. That way you get the cinnamon flavor throughout the cake, but this is pretty good. It's pretty easy too. I'm pleasantly surprised that the margarine didn't give it a horrible flavor. That's pretty good. But even when I smelled the margarine, it didn't have that same signature smell that I remember when I was a kid. So maybe margarine has improved a lot since I was a kid, but because I really hated it when I was a kid, but this is pretty good. I would definitely make this again. I love that crunchy topping. There is almost, I want to say an olive oil or an avocado oil flavor, even though the margarine doesn't contain any of those oils. But it is a little bit different of a flavor, I feel like, than if you use butter, of course. I'd really like to try this again with butter, but now I usually like to serve my coffee cake with cream, so I'm actually going to add some of that and try it again. Kind of chop the cake up so that the cream can absorb into it. Yeah, definitely recommend it with the cream. I have to admit, I'm a little surprised at how good this was because I used the margarine, and I would certainly make it again and maybe tweak a few things. But I'm excited for the next recipe, which should be pretty interesting. Final 70s sourdough recipe that I'll be trying is Jeff's chocolate nuggets. What I'm gathering from the recipe is that these are basically donut holes that you dip in a sour cream chocolate glaze. And there's a cup of raisins in them, so I'm a little curious how that will work out, but I'll hold out judgment till I try them. To make them, you'll need 1 3/4 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of cocoa, half a cup of granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 cup of butter melted. Thankfully it's not margarine this time. 1 egg beaten, half a teaspoon of soda, half a teaspoon of baking powder, half a cup of milk, half a cup of sourdough starter, 1 cup of raisins, and oil for frying. The recipe is pretty bare bones. You mix the ingredients as listed. I don't really agree with the order that they have you mix the ingredients in. I just think it makes more sense to whisk all of the dry ingredients together, then add the wet ingredients, but I decided to go ahead and do what the recipe book said. I accidentally bought jumbo raisins, and that wasn't ideal for this recipe, but I went ahead and used them. And then heat the frying oil to 360 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you drop the batter by small teaspoonfuls into the hot oil. Fry them for about 1.5 minutes or until done. Turn them once during frying. Drain them on brown paper grocery sack. The brown paper wasn't really cutting it for me, so I switched to paper towels. Dip the tops of the warm nuggets into sour cream chocolate glaze. To make the sour cream chocolate glaze, combine 4 cups of powdered sugar or 1 box, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 2 ounces of unsweetened baking chocolate melted. I opted for dark chocolate chips here instead. 1/4 cup of sour cream and 3 to 4 tablespoons of milk, and blend until smooth. Okay, Jeffrey, I have some questions. This is one of the more interesting recipes that I've tried out. The raisins frying were a little disconcerting, I have to admit. They kind of ballooned up, and that wasn't super appetizing to me, but the chocolate glaze actually does look kind of pretty, and the outside of the nuggets, donuts, whatever, it's kind of crispy, kind of nice, but yeah, there's only one way to find out. Let's give it a taste test. This might be my new favorite thing, who knows? Okay, so they look soft on the inside, but it looks like they are done in the center, so it doesn't look like it's doughy. Here goes nothing. Okay. The outside is nice and crispy, but it's not like a really hard crispy that will like hurt your mouth. You can taste the chocolate in the main part of the nuggets, but you can also get some cinnamon. It was actually not bad, but let me try to get a bite with a raisin. Not bad. Wow, I'm surprised by how good the texture is. I would say obviously the raisins would be more evenly distributed if you didn't use jumbo raisins. I'm pretty surprised by how not bad these are. I don't think that the dough itself has a ton of flavor. I could maybe do like with some vanilla, maybe a little more salt, but the texture is really nice. Nice and soft, but not doughy. And you hear that crunch. The dough itself isn't super sweet, so that means that the glaze doesn't make it super sickeningly sweet. Would I go through the trouble to make them again? I personally think that the flavor payoff is not enough to warrant the work of deep frying, but they're pretty decent. And probably if you are a big raisin fan and you used smaller raisins so they're more evenly distributed, you probably would really enjoy this flavor. This flavor combination is just really interesting with chocolate, cinnamon, and raisins, you know, plus the sour cream. Okay, Jeff. I'll give you that one. It's okay. So overall, these 70 sourdough recipes were kind of hit and miss for me. The peanut butter biscuits weren't super flavorful and the texture wasn't amazing, but the Yankee Doodle Snipdoodle was actually really good. I really enjoyed that and I would make that again. And of course, Jeff's nuggets here. You know what I think about those. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching me test out the 70 sourdough recipes. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to check out this video next that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. In the introduction, for quick bread,
With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse.
but apparently the snickerdoodle